Good morning. It is 11:02 a.m. on July 28th, 2011, and this meeting of the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority Board is now called to order. Ms. Rowe, any public comments? Item 3, adoption of the minutes for the CRRMA board meeting of May 11th, 2011. Has everyone had an opportunity to review the minutes? Any additions, changes, deletions? If not, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second? All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Minutes are approved. Item 4, discussion and action on board resolutions authorizing the executive director to execute the following instruments as they relate to the development of the Loop 375 Cesar Chavez Border Highway Managed Lanes project. Mr. Tejas.
Good morning, Brandon Tejas, Executive Director. Item number 4 relates to the various documents that are required to implement the Cesar Chavez project. By way of background, as you all will recall, the RMA has executed a financial assistance agreement with the state of Texas, with TxDOT in particular, related to this project. However, that financial assistance agreement required the execution of a project development agreement prior to the RMA's access to the funding available to do oversight and some additional services that the RMA will provide. This item was added to the agenda in the hopes that the RMA and TxDOT could finalize the agreements listed before you. Unfortunately, we have not yet finalized those. We received the drafts of these documents from TxDOT on Monday, and we're negotiating those now. We're hopeful that we can get those finalized and brought back to you for the August 10th meeting. So I would ask that this item be deleted, subject to your questions.
Any questions? If not, is there a motion to delete item 4?
Move to delete.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor? Any opposed? Item 4 is deleted. Item 5, discussion and action on board resolutions authorizing the executive director to execute the following instruments as they relate to Loop 375 at FM 659 Zaragoza Direct Connector project. Mr. Tejas.
This item is similar to number 4 in that we don't have the documents ready just yet. As a reminder for this one, the Zaragoza project, the RMA will be providing a portion of financing for this project, which requires the execution of a state infrastructure bank loan with TxDOT, as well as a pass-through toll agreement with TxDOT. Those draft agreements have not yet been received by the RMA, but we're hopeful that we will get them soon and that we can hopefully get this one on for the August 10th date as well. That's our hope. I provided a memorandum with a brief background on this item for you as well in your packets, but subject to your questions, I'd ask that this item be deleted as well.
Second.
All those in favor? All those opposed? Item 5 is deleted. Item 6, discussion and action regarding the 82nd Texas Legislative Session and Special Session relative to the CRRMA's legislative priorities. Mr. Tejas.
This item relates to, and in fact, I've provided a brief memorandum to the board in your board packets that identifies the additional backup materials. As you'll recall, in October of 2010, the board identified legislative priorities going into this last legislative session, and specifically identified 5 areas. In addition, the board identified 2 additional areas that we would like to see progress on, however, identified really the 5 legislative priorities for the RMA. Those specific priorities relate to primacy, extension of CDA authority, Comprehensive Development Agreement authority, a cleanup to the RMA statute, cleanup to the Transportation Reinvestment Zone statutes, and improvements to the environmental review process. Those were the 5 legislative priorities identified by this board in October, and what you find behind that resolution is actually a memorandum from the RMA's outside attorneys that identify, it's a side-by-side comparison of the priority and the individual priorities and the legislation that actually passed in this session. What you'll note is that the Regional Mobility Authority actually did quite well in this last session. In terms, and I'll go through them very briefly, but we can take any additional time if you're interested in discussing any of these items. On the primacy item, we were looking to have some legislation eliminate the market valuation process and also establish the order of priority for local toll project entities. Senate Bill 19 did exactly that, so we're in good shape on that one. The extension of CDA authority was also granted to RMAs. In fact, RMAs can do design build and design build finance independent of the Comprehensive Development Agreement, which I think is a real improvement to the existing process. That was accomplished through Senate Bill 1420. The RMA cleanup related to Chapter 370 of the Transportation Code, which really governs how regional mobility authorities operate in the state of Texas. We were looking for various improvements to the language that included improvements to the way TRZ projects are handled, the ability for RMAs to develop parking facilities, and also various other cleanup areas to that existing legislation. House Bill 1112 does all of that and more. So that was a very good bill for RMAs. And so now I should mention regional mobility authorities in the state of Texas can now actually develop and operate parking structures. So we have expanded abilities. That went well, obviously. Transportation reinvestment zones, we're looking for legislation to clean up some of the existing TRZ legislation. That happened through House Bill 563 and House Journal Resolution, I believe that is 63, and House Bill 1420. Those three bills made various improvements to the TRZ statutes. So we did well on that one as well. Lastly is the environmental review process. What we were looking for there was legislation that would allow local tolling project entities, such as the RMA, the Camino Real RMA, to actually provide additional funding to the federal agencies, if not the state as well, to expedite environmental reviews. So that was accomplished through the House bills and Senate bills identified there. So as I mentioned before, this session was actually really a good one for regional mobility authorities in particular, but TxDOT as well. I should mention, actually, as part of the legislative priorities, those were the 5 that were identified. In addition to that, we also talked about several areas that we would like to see addressed as well. Those included funding. We wanted to see the remaining Prop 12 bond funds issued. And we also wanted to see improvements to toll violation enforcement and collection procedures. We'll talk about Proposition 12 in the Executive Director's report. But in terms of the improvement to the toll violation enforcement and collection procedures, those were accomplished through House Bill 1112 as well. So not only did we achieve all of the legislative priorities, we also hit the 2 additional areas that we wanted to see improvement in. Lastly, in your packet, you'll see this bound report. This was developed by our outside attorneys who monitored all the legislation and who kept us abreast of the developments through the session. This is the much more in-depth review of how the legislative session went in terms of the transportation legislation. So when you have a moment, flip through this and let me know if you have any questions. Either I can answer them or I can get our attorneys to answer them for you. So there's no action on this, subject to your questions.
I think the summary was really good, very concise, and it looks like we got what we needed done.
Yes, ma'am. It was a good session for us. Yes.
I think, go ahead.
Just a couple questions on the environmental review process. Does that mean that the process has been streamlined, less requirements, shorter times? What exactly is it that
changed?
Well, the change itself was the ability for an RMA, and I'll be very specific. It allows the Camino Real RMA, should we need to provide additional funding to, for example, TxDOT, to provide additional staffing to review our environmental application quicker.
But it doesn't streamline the process itself.
It doesn't change the process, no. That's correct. It does not change the process. It'll allocate resources.
And make the process quicker by having additional resources allocated to the project, hence the intent. I mean, if there's no benefit, then we wouldn't do that, because there would be a cost to the RMA, correct, Raymond?
Exactly. Yes, sir.
And another question on the enforcement thing. I mean, on the toll lanes on Cesar Chavez, for example, in the future, if somebody uses the lanes and doesn't pay or whatever, our enforcement or ability to enforce that is improved. But does that mean we have to coordinate with the police, the sheriff, the county? How would the mechanism of enforcement work? We're not going to have our own enforcement police, so to speak, right? How do we?
Well, what
I mean, looking into the future, how does that jive with the existing authorities?
Well, I'll speak to specifically what we were looking for in that area.
Mm-hmm.
The way that actually, let me state it this way. There's Chapter 370 of the Transportation Code deals with RMAs and how they operate. And in 370, it was very limited with regard to the enforcement abilities of a regional mobility authority to pursue someone who has violated one of your toll policies. So there just wasn't that enforcement ability or capability. Whereas North Texas Turnpike Authority, they had their own set of legislation that allowed them to do certain enforcement procedures. And then also Harris County out of Houston had their own. So what we've done now is we now have the authority to pursue whatever anybody else is doing and operate as they do. So to answer your question, I can't give you this is what we will do from now forward. It's more just having the opportunity to pursue those avenues that the other tolling entities have throughout the state.
And eventually we'll have to determine, once the toll roads become a reality, what kind of mechanisms are available, towing, impounding, garnishing wages, whatever that may be.
That's correct. And in fact, under item 4, where we're talking about Cesar Chavez, with the work authorization that is included as one of the agreements that we will execute, one of the items in that scope of work is to identify how the toll operations will actually work, including the enforcement.
Okay. I mean, that's an important question, because we don't want to become a law enforcement agency either. So there have to be mechanisms for having coordination with the people that actually do enforcement on traffic.
That's correct. We will not have an RMA police force.
Right.
Sounds like the intent was just make it consistent with what was happening in the rest of the state, and so hopefully we're able to get that done. The TRZ cleanup legislation, I think, Raymond, we were the first community that actually put TRZs in place. So was there anything specific or anything important in that cleanup legislation that affects because I believe we currently have 2 TRZs, correct?
That's correct. We were one of the first to put it together. We were the first to actually use a TRZ to actually finance a project. One of the main fixes in that legislation was actually to decouple the requirement that if you are using TRZ generated increment, you also had to have a pass-through toll component. That's been decoupled, so you no longer have to have the two, which has been a huge plus as far as improvements. A lot of the other improvements actually dealt with counties, and in fact there has been authorized a vote of the public to determine how counties use TRZs. And it'll allow them to be a little bit more in line with the way that municipalities operate in the state of Texas in terms of TRZs. So that, in the end, if there were some sort of a partnership between the Camino Real and El Paso County, that would streamline our operations through the county as well.
Good.
I have a comment. The third paragraph of their report, the Loch Lord Bissell report, credits the 2030 committee with dampening the anti-toll sentiment that was previous in other legislative sessions. So, though we didn't get much else accomplished, we did do that. So, well, like shooting at the moon with a BB gun, you know?
It's a good point. I think that the 2030 report was read widely, and I think everybody took something from it. So I think it was very valuable.
Mr. Tays, any action required on item 6?
No, sir.
Okay. Item 7, discussion and action on a board resolution authorizing the executive director to issue a request for qualifications seeking a professional auditing service relative to the CRRMA's annual audit requirements. Mr. Tays?
As a reminder, the board directed the staff to issue several procurements over this past year. One of them was for marketing, which we will deal with on the next item. The second was the issuance of a procurement for the selection of an annual auditor. As you know, we are required by law to be audited on an annual basis. So what you see before you is a resolution, and then behind the resolution you actually have the draft request for qualifications. And I'll go through very briefly what it includes, and stop me if you'd like to discuss any particular point. But this follows the format that the RMA has developed for its procurements. You've got the purpose, you've got the background of the Regional Mobility Authority, you have the process outlined, you have the submittal format, submittal content that's required of anyone seeking to participate in the procurement, and you actually have the selection process. This one, I should mention, was deleted from the last agenda that we had to allow a little bit more time to develop this one, because it is actually a request for qualifications as opposed to request for proposals. request for qualifications is required in an instance where you are actually selecting what are referred to as professional services. Certified public accounting services are professional services under the statutes of the state of Texas. So it's a little bit of a different process, and really ultimately the difference is requests for qualifications require that you select the entity based on demonstrated competence and qualifications and not based on price, whereas request for proposals allows you to select on price. So what you see before you is a procurement that is looking for qualifications from qualified certified professional accounting firms. And I would turn your attention specifically to page 9. That's where we identify the actual criteria and weighting of the evaluations for any submittals that we receive. What I'm proposing in this draft procurement is that the general overview of the firm would be weighted at 25%, and we would have a scale of 100 points. General overview would be 25%, and that essentially speaks to the firm's history, general description of the firm, also the corporate address, and general information about the firm. The second item, which would account for 50% of the points, would be experience in professional auditing services. So that would speak, obviously, specifically to demonstrated competence and qualifications. And the last item for 25% would be the specific approach for the Camino Real audit, capacity and capability of the firm's resources as it relates specifically to our annual audits. So that's the breakdown that I'm proposing. Now, obviously, not only is the breakdown, but the rest of the RFQ is open for your discussion and revision.
One of the important items to note is I discussed this with Mr. Tejas, and he's going to, while the RFP won't be based on, or RFQ won't be based on pricing, Mr. Tejas is going to actually request pricing in a sealed envelope that once we then rank and begin number 1, we will have the pricing available at that time that we can open up and then begin negotiating with them. So it's very clear in terms of where the negotiating and where the pricing is, as opposed to someone coming in being ranked number 1 and then trying to negotiate the pricing, which I think was a great idea. So is there any comments regarding kind of the ranking or how the 3 areas are going to be scored or weighted?
I actually would direct the question to David. Does that sound fairly standard?
Pricing is always a separate sealed
Yeah.
part of a bid, but pricing is also weighted in every government audit bid I've seen. So that would be different, not having that as part of your weighting, part of your average. You will end up with 1 or 2 firms that are highly qualified, and you're going to be surprised at the price. It's going to be somewhat different than what we're used to.
Well, and I'll mention the process that I'm envisioning in this RFQ is that the submittals will come in, they'll be evaluated, and the highest ranked will be number 1. And then I will sit down and negotiate with number 1. And now if those prices are not in what I consider reasonable, in coordination with individual board members, and actually perhaps we can talk about whether or not we want to take this through the finance committee. But if they're not what's termed reasonable, then I would recommend that we go on to number 2. Now that would require board action, but that's the way that you deal with the pricing issues in terms of a government contract.
There's no firm rule. I mean, we can do it that way, and it might work better. I don't know. Just as a point of fact, the state of New Mexico, the state auditor in Santa Fe controls all the government audits that are done by CPA firms in New Mexico. And so the bidding process goes on directly with the agency, the municipality or whatever it is, and then it has to be approved by the state auditor. But the state auditor publishes a list every year of last year's audits and how much they cost. So every CPA firm logs in and goes, and he or she can check and see what the cost has been averaging for that agency to do that audit. And the bidding generally stays very close to the prior year numbers. So in Texas, we don't have that, obviously. So bidding tends to be all over the place, and you'll get a bid for 8,000 to 10,000, and you'll get a bid for 30,000 to 40,000 on this. And I'm just giving you a heads up. It will happen.
Hopefully, we get a number of bids.
You will. You will. And actually, this is really good. You've made it general enough to be inclusive enough, so you'll have a lot more responses coming. But ultimately, on the experience, it needs to be government experience, not general auditing. Because it's a world that's very different, too.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I've learned that over the last few years.
I do think that maybe it ought to go to the Finance Committee, too. I think it at least run through to make a recommendation to the board.
There's a process.
Absolutely. What we could do then is, once the submittals come in, we can have the evaluation team rank them and bring the evaluation team to the Finance Committee, and we can start there.
That's fine.
Certainly, we'll do that.
Okay. Otherwise, good job.
Thank you.
Is there a motion authorizing the executive director to issue a request for qualifications seeking professional auditing services relative to the CRRMA's annual audit requirements?
So move.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Item 8, discussion and action regarding the CRRMA's request for proposals for marketing and outreach services.
As I mentioned on the prior item, this was the other procurement that the board wanted to pursue this past year. This request for proposals was issued, and unfortunately, we received one response, as I mentioned in the memorandum.
From our current provider.
That's right, from our current provider. And I should mention, though, for the public, the reason why the board went out for a procurement is not because of any dissatisfaction with the current provider. It was rather to offer the opportunity to new providers.
And that's the same also for the auditing services.
Absolutely.
On the prior item that we discussed.
That's absolutely correct. So what I'm recommending is in the bottom of the memorandum I provided to you, in line with the RMA's existing procurement policies, I'm recommending that the board authorize the RMA staff to continue to utilize the existing provider on an as-needed basis.
And that existing provider is Lopez Marketing, correct?
That's correct.
So we'll continue to use the current provider and also have the flexibility to go out as needed, and if we need to have a different type service, to be able to utilize a different provider as well.
That's correct.
But Lopez has done a good job for us. They've done all our annual report, our strategic plans, all the documentation, some of our brochures, and they've done quality work.
Raymond, I have a question. It goes back to the last RFQ we just talked about, too. You didn't send this out to advertising agencies directly at all?
No, sir. In fact, as a governmental agency, I've always been a little hesitant with the idea that the governmental agency would single out individual firms to send a procurement to. So rather, what I did was a much more global approach. It went out to all of the email list. It went on our website. It went to the city's PIO office. It went to the Chamber of Commerce, and it also went to the only advertising organization that I could find in the city, which is a group by the name of Advertising Federation. I spoke with the president of that organization, and he distributed it to his entire organization.
So it did get wide distribution?
I believe it did. I honestly don't know. And I should mention that procurement also included an interim step which asked any individuals that are interested to send us questions by a certain date. We did receive questions and interest from at least 2 firms. So I know that individuals saw it, but for some reason there just wasn't the interest.
Okay. And how are we going to distribute the RFQ for the auditing service?
The auditing is a little bit different. In fact, I was going to ask you after this meeting if there are CPA organizations in town that I could tie into. But beyond that, I will post this one on the Texas Register. It is a professional services procurement, so it's a little bit different. It'll go in the Texas.
Ad in the Times, I believe you mentioned to me.
That's correct. So Texas Register will go out statewide. The El Paso Times obviously will be here local. It'll go to the chambers as well, our email list, and the usual areas.
Contact the El Paso chapter of the Texas Society of CPAs, and if you can't find the number, call me and I'll give it to you later today.
Excellent. I'll do that.
Right.
And if you're aware of any other organizations, please let me know. And in fact, when this is posted, I'll send it out to you all as well, and through your business contacts.
If you send it to the chamber, they distribute a list every month, I guess, of current.
That's my understanding.
Well, we get it, so.
Oh, okay. So let me know if you don't see it.
If you're a member of the chamber.
Yeah, and you have to be a member to get it, obviously, but you're sure.
What action is required on number 8, Raymond?
Really, actually, there's no action required, as long as
Continue to use them.
There's not a motion required for?
No, I mean, I was requesting a motion that you authorize staff to continue to utilize the existing provider, but ultimately, there's not really an action necessary.
So do we need a motion?
No.
Item 9, discussion and action on a board resolution approving the executive director's annual performance evaluation, authorizing the CRRMA chair to communicate the results of the evaluation to the city of El Paso and take other actions as necessary. And we have Mr. Norman Gordon here. Mr. Gordon?
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. We have gone through the evaluation process required under Mr. Tejas' contract with the city and the city's contract with the RMA. Those results and the process was similar to the process that was done in the last 2 evaluations, in that the evaluation form was sent to all the members of the board. The evaluation form was sent to representatives of various entities with whom you are doing business and with which Mr. Tejas interacts. And those results have been compiled and been discussed, as I understand it, between the chair and Mr. Tejas. So it's up to you all now to take action. There are different actions that you have the opportunity to take, and of course you have the opportunity, if you want to discuss this, to discuss it in executive session.
Got it. I reviewed Mr. Tejas' evaluation with him. Across the board, he exceeds performance standards. But if you'd like to retire to executive session, we can discuss that more in depth, or we can basically proceed with the motion authorizing me to communicate those results. And based on Mr. Tejas' evaluation, there is a certain incremental increase which to his overall salary based on the results of exceeding the performance standards. So I'm going to leave it up to the board. If you'd like to retire to executive session, we can talk about it more at length, or we can just proceed with the motion.
I'm happy letting you communicate those results to him.
I've already done so. If
And-
you'd like to see him kind of in depth, I'd be glad to kind of go over them with the board as well.
I anticipate that probably most of our results were pretty much the same.
You are right. And if you'll give me the liberty, I don't think I'm out of line. I'll just mention a couple of results. And I discussed this with Raymond, but Raymond is a tremendous asset. Mr. Gordon, thank you, to the RMA. A couple of key points. Talks about, really, in Raymond's evaluation, his ability to kind of cut through the fog and get to the meat of the matter. Handles himself in a very ethical manner. Communicates extremely well to the board. Is a tremendous asset and representative for the RMA. And across the board, in terms of the quantity and quality of work, as a board, as an organization, we're privileged to have someone of Mr. Tejas' caliber, and we appreciate all of his efforts on behalf of the RMA, the city of El Paso, the community members of this, the citizens of El Paso. So, Raymond, thank you for everything that you do for the RMA.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Any questions in regards to that? So I wish my reviews were that quality. Okay, so just have to review myself sometime. Mr. Gordon?
No, you have a resolution before you. If you want to act on it, the resolution would provide for the incremental increase that is incorporated with his contract, and essentially no other changes.
Got it. So all we need is a board resolution authorizing and approving the executive director's annual performance evaluation, authorizing the CRRMA chair to communicate the results of the evaluation to the city of El Paso.
And I think Raymond has passed it out, so everyone has it in front of them.
Yes.
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Tejas, thank you for your fine service over the past year, and we're looking forward to the same in the coming years. So
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Item 10, discussion and action on the executive director's report. A, Proposition 12 bond program.
Okay, so Proposition 12, to take a step back, in 2007, a vote of the citizens of the state of Texas authorized the state to issue $5 billion in bonds specifically for transportation projects. However, that vote also required the legislature to specifically authorize the bond issuances. So that happened in 2007. In 2009, the legislature authorized the issuance of $2 billion in Prop 12 bond funds, but left the remaining $3 billion. And in fact, of that $2 billion, a majority of the funding for Cesar Chavez is coming from that $2 billion in Proposition 12 bond funds. The remaining $3 billion, however, were not authorized by the legislature in 2007. And the hope, and in fact, as we were discussing the legislative priorities, one of our other interests was getting the remaining $3 billion issued. That did happen in this last session. So that $3 billion has been authorized by the legislature to be issued. Now the process has begun to actually authorize and identify the projects for use by that $3 billion. So if you turn to the materials I provided you, and in fact these materials were actually back up to a recent Transportation Commission meeting. If you turn to the back page, you'll see the proposed distribution for those remaining $3 billion. If you go to the line with El Paso, you'll see that El Paso's allocation is $58 million. The way that the state is looking to allocate these $3 billion follows in line with the way that the stimulus fund program was distributed, in that one portion goes directly to the local MPOs, the remaining portion goes down to TxDOT for their distribution.
And the portion that the MPO is 21 million and TxDOT is 37 million, hence the 58.
Exactly. That's exactly right. What we're hearing from TxDOT is that approximately 10 million of their identified 37 million will actually go towards their district, which is outside of the county of El Paso. So and I should mention too that all of these are draft documents, all of these are draft numbers, and this is as we stand today, and this is in motion. But I wanted to brief you all so that you all aren't surprised by this once it's actually finalized. But the way that it's currently looking is that 10 million of the 57 would actually go towards the TxDOT region that sits outside of El Paso County. The remaining 47 million actually then would go towards our region here in El Paso.
How is the 10 split between the safety and the metro? How is it split? Does it come out of one bucket?
And actually, I should have mentioned that the columns, the 21 million that's identified as metro and urban mobility, that's the MPO bucket. The 37.1 of rehab and safety, that's the TxDOT bucket. So the 10 million would come out of the 37 million. So then that leaves you 21.1 of metro and urban MPO dollars and 37.1 of TxDOT dollars.
When are those funds available?
Those are actually available over a 2-year period.
Beginning when?
This fiscal year.
Which begins?
In September 1, I believe they track ours.
Because, me personally, I'm always hopeful that we'll find some more dollars to be able to add some more direct connectors to Americus. But as I understand it, basically you have TxDOT and the MPO, and they'll meet and decide how those funds will be allocated. And I believe they could either combine those funds, or the MPO could use their funds for a certain number of projects, and TxDOT potentially could use their funds. So there's a whole host of projects that are available, and it'll be determined and allocated how that money will be spent. Is that correct?
That's correct. In fact, that's exactly the process that's happening now. The Transportation Policy Board, which is the governing board of the El Paso MPO, has a subcommittee referred to as the TPAC, and that TPAC has already had 2 meetings, and in fact, they had a work group under them that actually had, I believe, 1 or 2 meetings as well. There's an additional TPAC meeting in mid-August that I will, of course, attend, where they will further refine this. So the process the chair outlined is exactly what's happening right now. So what they're looking at right now is the current priorities for the Transportation Policy Board have been identified as the Comprehensive Mobility Plan, and beyond that, one Alameda project that the city is very interested in. So with those as the priorities, the TPAC has begun looking for scenarios that they could present as recommended approaches for the expenditure of these funds to the actual Transportation Policy Board. So that'll happen in the coming months, and I'll keep you apprised.
Mr. Calvo, do you have anything to add to that discussion in terms of how we understand that process and the funding to work?
Good morning. Eduardo Calvo with TxDOT here in El Paso. I think overall Mr. Tejas did a very good job in explaining what's going on with Proposition 12. the fact that the $3 billion are being distributed into several categories that you probably see in your backup. At the state level, I believe it's 600 million that is being distributed to the MPOs, and out of that 600 million, 21 is coming to the El Paso MPO. $1.4 billion is going to be distributed to all the districts, to the TxDOT districts, and from that, we're getting 37 million. And as Mr. Tellez said, that is really more the discretion to of TxDOT, of our district engineer, and Mr. Berry, who, will retire very soon. He set up certain priorities, and one of the decisions that he made was to set, out of the 37, set 10 million to the rural counties that are part of our district, the other 5 counties, for other, important projects that we want to implement out there. So that leaves a remaining 27 from the TxDOT bucket and the 21 from the MPO bucket open for projects that the community would like to advance.
Does TxDOT have kind of a list of projects already, or are they working in conjunction with the MPO to kind of combine those funds?
Both, as Mr. Tellez said, in the work group, then the technical TPAC, the committee that the TPV has to discuss these issues, we have proposed certain projects where the district feels that are, are sort of our top priorities. It includes a project in Anthony. It includes a widening of Montana from Yarborough to Loop 375 to widen that segment the right way, and several other projects. There's been a lot of talk about adding another connector to the I-10 Americas. But as Mr. Tellez said, we are right now in the very early stages of discussion. There are, again, we've got some pretty strong priorities or projects that we feel very strongly about. The city of El Paso has also provided a couple of projects that they want to pursue. And I believe that at the policy board meeting next week on Friday, I believe it's the 5th of August, we will discuss these projects. It's not, the board is not scheduled to take any formal action on approving or anything, but we really would like to present these projects for discussion and, start getting everybody aware of which are the priorities that we all want to pursue.
Will there be a formal list that'll come out that'll communicate how the money's going to be spent, and what would be the timeline for that?
Yes, actually, at the commission meeting today, they were going to finalize the rules, and I don't know if they did, to be honest with you, but the draft rules called for the TxDOT list to be finalized and submitted to TxDOT so that the commission would approve that at their September meeting. Then the MPO list would follow a month later. I really don't understand why they didn't do them simultaneously, but ultimately, these project lists go to the commission for commission approval.
Got it. Any questions for Mr.
Yeah,
Colby?
I have another kind of question, a different kind of question, looking at the numbers in the distribution throughout the state. Are we really faring that well? Because I'm looking at communities that are smaller than El Paso, like Tyler and Waco and Yoakum and Wichita Falls and Beaumont and so forth, and they get considerably more money. I mean, I know that's a political question, but I mean, did we really do that well?
I know the answer.
I mean, I know why Waco
I was
might.
wondering how long it would take someone to ask that question.
I don't know if Mr. Colby was the right person to ask that question.
I know, but I mean, if you have any hint, or maybe Raymond, I mean, but
Let me tell you what I do know is that
Yeah.
different buckets have different distribution formulas.
right.
The MPO 600 million was distributed according to the Category 2 distribution formula.
Mm-hmm.
The 1.4 billion that was distributed to the districts followed the Category 1, which is rehab and safety formulas. Now, why the legislature decided to separate chunks, for example, for the bridge reconstruction, which I believe is, and I apologize, I don't have the list, but I think it's 300 million or 500 million. That was really, the legislature thought it was important to advance or to make this money available for major bridges that require rework and dedicated to those bridges. We didn't have any bridge in that category here in our district, so we missed out of that portion of the funding. There was another portion that was dedicated for preliminary engineering activities for major projects. And again, we missed out on that category as well. But the other fundings where the other funding categories where we did get money, those were based on formulas.
The real answer,
No.
our weather is so good, our roads just don't deteriorate. And that's the mindset in Austin. So, but to the point about bridges, you're right. We have a number of bridges that are seriously deteriorating in the state, and we don't worry about bridges out here because we're not going to fall in any water. But in other parts of the state, things are really rough on some of the bridges, and they do need some serious repair. So that is a big chunk of this. But yeah, it's a mindset and it's a political decision.
Yeah.
Well, I'm certainly glad to see money being allocated in that area. We see what happens when we don't take it. I believe it was Minnesota that had that catastrophic failure.
It's because when we talk about funding for projects, for example, Spur 601, we talk hundreds of millions of dollars, and it seems to me like 58.3 is really a small drop, and we can prioritize and distribute as much as we can. It's only going to go so far, and it's such a small amount.
We'll take any money we can get.
Of course.
We got a lot of need, and whatever's available, we're going to use.
It's a drop in the desert sand, I guess.
You got to start somewhere.
Yep.
Like Mr. Marcus says, BB gun at the moon. It just you got to keep getting after it.
I should remind my students in the political. I just talked about Texas government today. Tomorrow, I'll let them know.
Mr. Caldwell, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. Item 10B is fiscal year 2012 budget. This is just informational more than anything. Now that we've finalized the remaining item, which was the annual performance evaluation, which was item 9, that I can finalize the proposed budget for next year. So I'll be requesting a meeting of the Finance Committee over the next week to present that to you all for action. Then the remaining item is 10C, which is the I-10 Corridor Aesthetic Improvement Project. As you may recall, that project is actually really structured to occur in really 2 phases. The first phase has heavy influence from the artist that was brought on by the city of El Paso to identify the existing locations along the I-10 area that require improvements. And she was to develop what we referred to as a conceptual design plan, which she's actually has titled the master plan. That master plan is actually complete and has been added to our website. So I wanted to alert you all to that and have you flip through there. The next step for the artist is actually and she's underway currently with our engineers. They are going through this master plan, identifying specific examples of improvements that could occur, and actually developing recommendations that will then be provided to the committee that has been created for this project for actual implementation of projects. So we're in that next stage, and I believe that the estimated completion date for this segment was September, which means that the committee will likely meet in October, of which Ms. Olguin is a member, and we will sit down and review her recommendations and actually at that point identify the improvements along I-10 that should occur, or at least the locations, I should say. Because at that point then the engineers go off and begin, and actually I should mention this is very important, that's when the public involvement occurs in terms of what improvements should happen. So we're moving right along, and I wanted to alert you this is a major milestone with the development of the master plan, so that's available online.
And we're looking at potentially the first of the projects for the aesthetic project being led sometime April of next year. Is that correct? Kind of a
That's our goal.
timeline?
Absolutely, that's our goal to actually let it. And as we've discussed, what this project could result in could either be one major project with the full $10.2 million going into it, or it could result in a string of 3 or 4 projects. But our ultimate goal is to have a project, whether it's the one or one of several, let in spring of 2012.
And really looking to really get the most bang for the buck. Where do we really spend the dollars to get the most improvement? And that's what the committee will go through and try to determine. So, any questions? Rosario, thank you for your participation on that. Look forward to seeing that come to. I think there's a lot of ways that money will help this community. So, looking forward to see the results. Any other questions for Mr. Tejas? We have a board meeting scheduled for August 10th. Is that correct?
That's correct.
For Wednesday?
That is, yes, we're back to our Wednesday regular time at 9 a.m. We got bumped, and I apologize for bumping you all so many times. This is a tough month. This is when the city adopts their budget, so they have all of the budget, or rather, they have all their hearings, so it's been a tough month.
If there's no other questions, is there a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? It's 11:47, and we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.